I can be sure I'm not talking to myself. Yeah, excellent. Okay, very good. Thank you. And just a reminder that when you're putting stuff in the chat box, make sure that you choose everyone and not just hosts and panelists. So that everyone can see what you're saying. And most of you are doing that, but just a little reminder. So I'm going to start with a question to you. We've got a definition here of social and emotional learning. Do you think at the moment that you are teaching social and emotional skills in your classroom? So think about your teaching and how you teach. And do you think that you're incorporating social and emotional learning in your classroom? You can just put a yes or a no or a maybe in the chat box. Trying, excellent, good, yes, maybe, not really, sometimes. Okay, good. I'm glad to see lots of people feeling positive. That's good. But of course, before you can really say yes or no, you need to understand exactly what social and emotional learning is. And I think sometimes that can be a bit difficult because there are lots of different definitions out there. Lots of different people think that social and emotional learning means different things. And that's why I've got this definition up here, which comes from CASEL. And CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning. So when we talk about social and emotional learning, we're talking about the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills and attitudes to develop healthy identities, to manage emotions, to achieve personal and collective goals, to feel and show empathy for others, to establish and maintain supportive relationships, and to make responsible and caring decisions. So that's a big, long definition. And to put it in a sort of more colloquial way, I guess what I would say is that when we're developing our social and emotional skills, we're learning about how to get along in society with other people. That's mainly it. So we don't just exist individually by ourselves. We exist as part of society, and social and emotional skills means kind of understanding yourself well enough to understand other people, to be able to work together. So if we can go on to the next slide, Emily. This is a very nice little diagram that just shows the sort of 5 key areas that make up social and emotional learning. And this is the model that was developed by CASEL, which, as I mentioned, is the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning. So CASEL is based in the United States. And it's not the only organization that talks about social and emotional learning. There are many others, and there are other ways to define it. I like using the CASEL model simply because I think it's very clear, it's very straightforward. This is the kind of thing you can put up on your classroom wall, or you can keep it on your phone and have a look at it, and just to remind yourself, these are the key things that make up social and emotional learning. So there are these five elements, and they're nicely depicted here in this circle for social and emotional learning. So if you look at the top 2, the ones in orange first, self-awareness and self-management is all about yourself, right? And then once you've developed an understanding of yourself and a way of managing yourself, the 2 green elements, social and awareness and relationship skills, are all about how you get along with other people, how you get along in relationships, how you understand other people, how you get on in society. And my interpretation of this model and of social and emotional learning is that really those 4 elements all kind of work together to create us, or help us develop into responsible decision makers, into citizens who make responsible decisions, who think about others and understand the impact that our action has on other people. So it all kind of leads to that, to us becoming responsible decision makers. So let's have a little bit more of a look in detail at each one of those. And the reason I want to share these with you is because I think these are terms that you will see a lot when you'll hear about people talking about social and emotional learning. You'll hear these phrases coming up. Well, it's good to understand what they mean. And I think a really important thing to remember is that when we develop our social and emotional learning, it doesn't stop. You know, you don't sort of look at a 10-year-old and think, well, they're a fully developed social and emotional, all their skills are completely developed and fine, and we don't need to worry about that anymore. You wouldn't look at a 30-year-old and say that. You wouldn't look at a 50-year-old and say that. It's an ongoing process where we're all working on our social and emotional skills and trying to get them to improve. But having said that, I think self-awareness, if we start with that, is very interesting, because you can see this begin to develop just from tiny babies. When you look at really little babies, just when they've just been born, they don't really understand where they stop and the world begins. You know, they don't quite know that that's their hand or that that's their foot. So they have no social self-awareness. And then gradually, as children start to grow up, they begin to be able to identify emotions. So one of the things that little children start to be able to do is to say things like, I'm angry, or I'm sad. So that's a really key thing that starts from a very young age. Having a growth mindset, I'm sure you've come across growth mindset, really means believing that however you're born, you can somehow improve, that you don't have a fixed set of abilities and talents, but that actually you can get better, you can work on things, you can improve all the time. And again, this is something that's important throughout our lives, not just for children, teenagers, but for adults as well. I'm sure that if you've ever tried to learn something new, you found that believing that you can get better is a very important part of that, and that's growth mindset. Examining your prejudices and developing interests. So those are all the key parts of self-awareness. Now let's have a look at the next one. Thank you, Emily. So the next slide is self-management. So if you think about being able to identify your emotion, as a child, you can say, I feel angry. But it's another level of ability then to be able to manage that anger. And in fact, even as adults, sometimes we find it difficult to manage our emotions. So it's a very useful skill to have, to manage your emotions, to understand the kind of strategies you can use to manage your stress, to exercise self-discipline. And I work for myself. I work at home in an office all by myself. Self-discipline is massively important for me because you know, it's so easy to get distracted into doing other things. So we all have to exercise self-discipline. It's a very important skill. And demonstrating personal and collective agency, which is really all about understanding that you can have an effect on how things happen. You can't just leave everything to other people. So that's self-awareness and self-management, and you can see those skills. Now we're moving on to the two that are more to do with getting on with other people. So social awareness is showing concern for others. And again, that's something that you start to see developing in very young children, in toddlers. Maybe you see them in children who are helping to look after their little siblings, or who understand sometimes perhaps that their parents might look sad and start to get worried about that. So it's something that can develop very young. It's a very important skill in all of us. The next one here that I've put down, identifying diverse social norms, which is a big way of saying something that's actually pretty straightforward, which is even for young children, it's understanding that what's normal in your house isn't necessarily normal in someone else's house. And that can be as simple as, we always have our supper at 5 o'clock, but my friend doesn't eat until 7 o'clock. Or it could be, we always go to practice our religion on a Sunday, but other people don't do that. So it's understanding that different people have different ways of living. Demonstrating empathy, which is similar to showing concern for others, means that you're understanding that other people have different kinds of emotions and you're trying to understand those, and equally taking others' perspectives. So it's just that beginning where you're looking outside of yourself and understanding how the people around you work and feeling for them. And then the second of these two sort of social things, if we move on to the next slide, is relationship skills. So relationship skills And I can guarantee that you do a lot of work on these in your lessons, even if you said, when I asked you earlier, do you think you're teaching social and emotional skills at the moment? You absolutely are, because you are doing all these things in your classroom. I'm sure that you're teaching your students how to communicate effectively. And of course, that doesn't just mean speaking and writing, it means listening as well. It means understanding body language, it means looking at people, all of those things. And you will be teaching that in your classroom. So you will already be doing a lot of work towards developing your students' social and emotional skills. So communicating effectively, demonstrating cultural competency. And I think Mary's probably going to be talking a bit more about that, because she's going to be no doubt sharing some of the material that we have from National Geographic Learning. But really being able to understand how different people live around the world and how different people work, and yeah, just the multiplicity of lifestyles and cultures that there are all around the world is very, very important. And of course, in National Geographic Learning, we try and really show that in our books, and we try and encourage all young people, all learners, adult learners as well, to understand that we work differently around the world. And cultural competency isn't just about understanding that people are different culturally, but it's also about discovering the things that make us the same. So you may look completely different to someone else, you may wear very different clothes, you may speak a different language, you may eat different kinds of foods, but quite possibly you share some very similar values. You may actually find that you agree when it comes to talking about the importance of your family or something like that. So cultural competency is really about understanding how we're different and also the things that we share. Now, the bottom two of these relationship skills kind of go together, which is showing leadership and practicing teamwork. And again, I think you're going to be covering these in your classes, because of course you're asking your students to work in pairs and to work in groups, and you probably do some team games where you get your students to go into teams and compete against each other. So all of those things, you know, even if you're not thinking to yourself, oh, today I'm doing some social emotional learning work, you are actually doing it. As soon as you say to students, get into groups and discuss this, they'll be practicing some teamwork. And they'll be showing some leadership as well. If you give different students different roles in the classroom, they'll be showing leadership. So those are the first four. And if you remember, I said that in my view, this is a very personal view, these four elements, the self-awareness, the self-management, the social awareness, the relationship skills, they all kind of lead to responsible decision makers. And that's what we want ourselves and we want our students to be. And that's people who understand themselves, are able to get on and think about other people and take other people's perspectives. And with all that in mind, they can make responsible decisions. So demonstrating curiosity and open-mindedness. And then, you know, these next two on my list, identifying solutions to problems and recognizing and using critical thinking skills. You'll probably be very familiar with the idea of those if you've looked at 21st century skills. So again, in the English language learning classroom, we use critical thinking skills all the time. Every time we ask the question, why? Or every time we do a reading comprehension activity, we're probably at some point using our critical thinking skills. And evaluating the consequences of actions, a very important part of being a responsible citizen, a responsible member of society. So I hope that that has clarified for you what we mean when we're talking about social and emotional learning. And it's quite useful to have all those terms in your head. So when I was first looking at social and emotional learning, because I like to find ways to make myself understand things better, I thought I'm going to try and put all these into a little story that will help me to understand how social and emotional learning works. So this is my social and emotional learning short story. So you can start off by thinking about self-awareness. So maybe you have a student and they think, I feel anxious about the test next week. So they're demonstrating a certain amount of self-awareness. They can identify the emotion and they understand the reason for the emotion. That's self-awareness. So then we come to self-management. How are you going to manage your anxiety? I feel anxious, so I'm going to go for a walk and try to calm down. Now your student is practicing self-management. So they're using a technique, a strategy that they've learned. Social awareness. Now looking outside themselves, looking at other people, my friend's very quiet today. Maybe they also feel anxious about the test. So then they start to use their relationship skills. I'm going to talk to my friend, I'm going to communicate and show support for them. So that's a good demonstration of relationship skills. And finally, the responsible decision making. My friend and I, working together, have decided to do some revision together this afternoon. So that one little scenario demonstrates all of those 5 key elements for social and emotional learning. And you can see how relevant that is to the classroom and to teaching English at all ages. So why is social and emotional learning particularly relevant now? I'm sure that you will yourselves be aware of the fact, especially with young people, that there is increasing concern about young people's mental health. A recent UNICEF study showed that 13% of adolescents aged 10 to 19 suffer from some form of mental health problem. And this has been exacerbated, made much worse by the pandemic, of course, because it disrupted young people's learning and it highlighted inequities around well-being. So, we all know during the pandemic, it was obvious that people who are financially worse off suffered because maybe they didn't have access to the internet, or they didn't have access to computers. So it was much more difficult for them to learn at home, or they didn't have space at home, or they didn't have, perhaps some people didn't have a supportive family. But that's only one side of the problem. So the other side of the problem is that, as well as those financial inequities, there are also mental health inequities. So students who hadn't developed really good social and emotional skills before the pandemic were the ones who were least able to cope when the pandemic came along, because they didn't have that resilience, they didn't have that independence, and it was much more difficult for them to cope. And just in case you're thinking to yourself, well, all that sounds great, but actually, at the end of the day, I need my students to pass their exams. So that's all really nice, but actually I need to get on with teaching the curriculum. Completely understand that. But numerous studies have shown that anxiety and stress affects young people's academic performance. So if your students don't have those good, well-developed social and emotional skills, they won't do as well in their exams, because they won't be able to use those stress management strategies. They won't be able to think independently. They won't be able to problem solve. Those things are really important for actually eventually passing the exams and doing well. And here's some statistics to show that. So these statistics, well, not statistics, but these facts here come from 2 studies. Ariel Lindorf in 2020 did a study for OUP, for Oxford University Press, on the impact of promoting student well-being. And then there was also the PISA study. If you're not aware of the PISA study, it's carried out by the OECD. The PISA study of 2015, approximately 540,000 students aged 15 took part in that. That represents about 29 million 15-year-olds in 72 different countries. So it's a massive study. And what that showed was that students with well-developed social and emotional skills make a smoother transition between primary and secondary. Sorry, Emily, can we just go back? Just that's it, thank you. They're more engaged in the classroom, they're less likely to drop out, they have better long-term outcomes, and they're more successful academically. So tons of reasons to focus on social and emotional learning in your classroom. And as I said, I bet you're already doing that, maybe if you're not even aware of it. But I'm going to hand over to Mary now, and Mary is going to take you through some National Geographic learning materials. So thank you.
Hello, and thank you all again for joining us. Can you hear me okay? My name's Mary Whitmore, and I'm a Senior Development Editor at National Geographic. And now that we've learned about the importance of social emotional learning from CAP, I'd like to look at some examples of how you can integrate it into your English classes. And I hope that the examples that we'll look at together will show you something fundamental about cell instruction. And that is that you don't need a separate cell lesson plan or a separate cell class period in order to integrate cell instruction into your classes, because it's often baked right into the materials you're already using. So now we'll take a look at some examples from each of these key areas from the CASTLE framework: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Okay, next slide. So the first area we'll look at is self-awareness. What does it mean to be self-aware? It means being able to identify aspects of yourself, such as emotions, thoughts, goals, desires, values, and many more things. And most of the competencies related to self-awareness involve getting students to look inward and discuss what they find out when they examine themselves. So here, this first example is a unit opener lesson from Impact, which is a middle school program. Take a look at what opportunities do you see for students to develop self-awareness in this lesson? The first question asks them to take a look at the photo and how they feel when they look at the photo. So this gives students an opportunity to identify their emotions and discuss them. So self-awareness. So now how about you? How do you feel when you look at this photo? So I wanted to point out here that although the focus of this example is self-awareness, the lesson also provides opportunities for students to develop skills in some of the other areas. So for example, the second question in item 1, how do you think the person in the photo feels, gets students to empathize with the climber. So it provides an opportunity to develop to develop social awareness as well. And the questions in item 2 relate to self-management. So as we can see from this lesson, many cell skills go hand in hand. For example, self-awareness, identifying emotions is the first step, and self-management, knowing what to do with those emotions, is the next step. To point out that using engaging photos like this one is a great way to include cell instruction in your classroom, as photos often elicit emotional responses and can provide opportunities for students to develop a few different cell skills from a few different areas. So next, let's take a look at self-management. Self-management-based activities help students develop the ability to manage their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations, so they can achieve their goals and aspirations and overcome challenges. And there are several different ways to weave self-management concepts into the English language classroom. One way is to include explicit values instruction, which you can see here in this example in the red and yellow box. And this example I'll mention is from Imagine, which is a primary program. And the value for this lesson is challenge yourself. And the song in the lesson, 12 Challenges, exemplifies this in a fun way. It's a song about 2 siblings who set a challenge and a goal for themselves to do 1 challenge every month for a year. It's a value that students can easily connect to their own lives. They can find something that they want to challenge themselves about and relate to that. And the more students are able to see the relevance of a skill or value, the more motivated they'll be to develop and use it. And next, we have a lesson from New Close-Up, which is a program for teens. And the lesson here is about developing positive habits. And it begins with an infographic which outlines 6 steps for developing a positive habit. And so students begin this lesson by matching the headings to the steps and then discussing some questions with a partner. And next, they look at the tips in the Mind Your Mind box, which are about challenging limited beliefs, and apply them to their own tendencies and own abilities to develop positive habits. And finally, students create a plan for something they want to achieve. So the lesson helps students develop self-motivation, goal setting, and planning and organizational skills, all valuable skills that can help them succeed in achieving their goals and aspirations. So next, let's look at an example of social awareness. What is social awareness? Social awareness is about understanding the perspectives of others and empathizing with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, which is especially important given that so many places are becoming more and more multicultural these days. The social awareness includes taking others' perspectives, recognizing the strengths in others, demonstrating empathy and compassion, showing concern for the feelings of others, and understanding and expressing gratitude. This lesson is from Reach for the Stars, which is a kindergarten program. And as you can see from the red and yellow box, this is an example of explicit cell instruction. And by this, I mean that the social emotional learning is just labeled on the page. But this is often not the case. In this lesson, students watch a short video showing people exemplifying the skills and complete some simple comprehension activities as they watch. So now let's take a look at the video.
We all have feelings. Sometimes we feel sad. Sometimes we feel angry. Sometimes we feel proud. And sometimes we feel frightened. Feelings are okay, but we all want to feel happy. How can we make others feel happy? We can listen when a pal is sad or angry, and laugh with them too. We can share our things and take turns too. We can be kind to people and animals, and take care of nature too. We can celebrate with others, and say please and thank you too. We can work with others, and be a good sport too.
So lots of examples there. And although the focus of this lesson is understanding how others feel, the video includes examples of some important aspects of relationship skills as well, such as collaboration, teamwork, and expressing gratitude. So again, a lesson or activity may help develop more than one area of self. I also wanted to point out again that this is an example of explicit social emotional learning instruction. But so much language taught in materials for young learners is naturally connected to social emotional learning. For example, making introductions, sharing, polite expressions, and identifying basic emotions such as happy and sad. The next example we'll look at is relationship skills. And this is an example from Reflect, which is an academic series. And social emotional learning is often associated with young children, but it's relevant to students of all ages. This lesson gets students to think about different relationships in their lives, the topic of relationship circles. Has anyone heard of relationship circles? They're circular diagrams that represent different categories of relationships. Our families, people we're close to, people we see and talk to, and other people that we don't know so well. So in this lesson, students create relationship circles and use them to think about the relationships in their own lives and the changes they may want to make. So for example, they may decide that they want to have more close friends. And in order to do that, they need to use some other relationship skills, such as communicating effectively and forming good relationships. I wanted to point out that this page is part of a reading lesson. And so as you can see, there are opportunities to develop cell skills and integrate cell instruction in the skills materials that you're already using, because they fall out very naturally. So again, you don't need to prepare a separate cell lesson or have a separate cell class period. The next and final area we'll look at is responsible decision making. It's important to teach responsible decision making to students of all ages. And to do this, it's helpful to use topics that get students thinking about their own personal choices. Topics such as food, routines, friendship, and physical fitness are all examples of topics that lend themselves to this quite naturally. And here we have an example from Our World 2nd edition, which is a primary program. And this song lesson provides an opportunity for students to develop responsible decision-making skills related to physical fitness. It's a topic that students can easily relate and connect to their own lives. And when students are able to connect a topic to their own lives, they're more likely to see its relevance and take an interest in it. And the more interest they have in it, the more motivated they'll be to put it into practice. And also, if the types of activities are ones that they can practice in their own lives, then they're more likely to practice it daily and develop a lifelong positive habit, such as exercising regularly, choosing healthy foods, and managing their time. So I hope these examples have helped you see that there are a variety of ways that you can integrate cell instruction in your classes that don't require you to have a separate cell lesson plan or a separate cell class period. So thank you very much. And now I'll turn it over to Lily.
Hello, everybody. I'm Faye. And first, I'd like to thank both Mary and Catherine for their share in the session. Kath, your SEL short story was very enlightening and inspiring, and we saw a lot of comments coming from the chat box mentioning about that. And Mary, the audience always thought that all the examples that you shared was also impactful and very inspiring. So thank you so much for that. And right now we move to a third part of our session that we have a conversation with Lily Sevilla. She's the academic director of CCCN, and she's going to share with us how they are incorporating social emotional learning into their English programs at CCCN. So thank you so much, Lily, for being here with us this morning. Before we get started, I just wanted to share with everyone what CCCN stands for and what it's like. So CCCN means Centro Cultural Costarricense Norteamericano. So it's a mouthful, right? It is a nonprofit pioneering entity and leader in the teaching of English in Costa Rica. As the only binational center in the country, it has served the community for almost 80 years as a bridge between both cultures. The center offers different English language programs for young learners, teens, and adults. And their mission is to enrich the quality of life through the teaching of the English language and the promotion of the cultures of Costa Rica and the United States of America, right? So Lily, it is a pleasure to have you here with us. And I'm just gonna jump right into our first question, if that's okay. Yeah, so
yes, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. So let's get started. So we know that you have English programs for all different segments and ages. So let's start talking about our young learners, right? And I'm curious to hear how CCCN are teaching social and emotional learning skills, or how the young learners, students at CCN, are learning about self-awareness and social awareness, which were, one of the two CASEL skills that both Mary and Kath talked about, and how those skills are helping them develop empathy, respect, and tolerance.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Fernanda, for that wonderful introduction. It's so great to be here and to be part of this panel, and to share a little bit of what we're doing and what our teachers are doing in this program. And I would just like to say that, like all of us, we had in 2020 to go into a full virtual scenario, right? And move completely all of our lessons to the virtual process. And it was key for us to maintain that connection and to keep that connection between our teachers and students. And I was listening to the presentation. One of the things that I think is very important is the fact that you don't need to create a curriculum outside of what our students are doing, outside of what we're doing, to be able to teach SEL. I think it comes naturally. And so with the kids, we use Look for Kids. We've also now have started to use a series called Imagine for the leveling. But as I talk to my teachers, right, and obviously we have a curriculum in place, but what we encourage our teachers is in their synchronous sessions to tropicalize what we say, right, to make it relevant for their students, and it comes natural for them. And so I guess the best part to answer your question is to give examples, right? And so our teachers love the photo openers. I think that's one of the key features, because for them, they feel it that this ignites curiosity for our learners, our young ones, as the photos portray the different scenarios around the world. But with the kids, they see photos where they can see themselves, right? Where they can relate.
Yes.
And this is what generates social awareness, allowing the students to see themselves. And most of the questions where we see, there's a beautiful picture where you have students jumping a rope. And so the question is, do you do this, right? And so it makes them aware of things about themselves, but also they see other cultural differences, because it can be in a different place, wearing a different clothes, different, haircuts and other things, but it does develop this empathy and respect. Something else that they love, and this is the teachers, they love the school trips, because it helps the students go a little bit more deeply with the social awareness. This areas of the school trips provides more opportunities for the teachers to do more guided activities, to interact and get the students to exchange ideas. And again, to give examples of their own situations and to think of other examples. And one of the things I think our teachers really love about the materials that we're using is that they're filled with values. And so I would have to say, one of our teachers did this. He incorporated with the older kids. He was thinking about, how to do movement and how to get them involved in different areas. So he thought about martial arts because he didn't need any props, but he wanted to have some movement and practicing techniques. So obviously he first asked students what they knew about China. And I guess he did a KWL, but they did different exercises about pointing, whether or not they knew where China was in a map and finding this out. They did a little bit of brainstorming activity to find out about the food and clothing. And then he started bringing out images about pictures and temples and monks. And they got their curiosity to learn about, movements and routines. And so it gives them this social self-awareness, but it also takes them into social awareness and appreciation for discipline and self-management. And this brings understanding and acknowledgement that later on turns into responsible social decision-making. So that's an example of the kids.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lily. And so by hearing you're telling us all that, it feels like, when you incorporate great photography and great elements into a lesson that helps children see themselves into those lessons and relate to those lessons, it becomes relevant for them, right? And some folks were actually mentioning that on the chat box as well. And that feeling of relevance actually ignites their curiosity. It makes them identify themselves within the lessons, and of course, makes them enjoy it, and the learning process becomes more significant, right?
Completely. And for the teens, and I was watching the chat, and somebody said impact is wonderful. We also feel impact is amazing, right? And
that's great.
With the teens, we have a very strong project-based learning scenario, right? We've even created a whole language scaffolding for the students to support them. But what we see with the projects, especially the video section, there's key detail that encourages students to reflect. And for us, is that reflection that our students can do, and especially with the projects on their own feelings, all of this that involves feelings. For example, there's a video about color, and in one of the sections, and how color correlates to emotions. And then the teachers really take advantage of this. I saw a teacher, it started with, what the students felt and how we feel about the colors. And so this was really impressive, because then they started working on the different areas of the adjectives, and of course we're language, right? But they infer factors about people related to their own personalities. And so we start with simple things like nationalities, hobbies, beliefs, likes and dislikes. And then they learn about adjectives to describe themselves: energetic, outgoing, patient, and give examples of why they consider themselves patient, and so forth. And then they start to reflect on their own identities and compare themselves and share them. And we can do, well, we're doing breakout rooms, but you can do different activities in a class. What we have encouraged our teachers has been to, we plan activities that can be used virtual or can be used face-to-face. But once they reflect on their own identity, one of the amazing things was they put it all in a small Padlet, and they gave, there was time for them to express themselves using the things that they liked and disliked. And so watching this Padlet for the students and, getting them encouraged, in terms of developing their creativity, it was a way to validate who they were. And so it was a whole color-coded that started with a color-coding scenario and I guess the unit is who am I, right? And so they do put into practice all that vocabulary, and then they also extend it to family members. So and then obviously teachers are encouraged to bring in additional material. So a teacher brought in a wonderful video about identity, in where students wear masks, and masks have colors, and so there's a whole story behind this. But at the end, the students were encouraged to comment, to reflect, to write a summary together, and this ended up being a whole collaborative activity.
Yes, and I really love this because all these examples show us how teachers at CCCN are actually putting a lot of strategies in place to create a safe environment for learners to express themselves and to develop their language skills, right? So the language activities are there. Of course, they're doing everything in English, but they're learning how to identify their feelings, talk about their feelings, and that developed self-awareness. But then at the same time, when they have the opportunity to pay attention to their peers, they're also developing social awareness and all of those SEL skills that come together when you are providing that safe environment in a classroom.
And thank you for saying this, Fernanda, because one of the things that we have really focused at CCCN is creating a safe environment for our teachers. I think it starts there, and that's the whole idea, right? For us is to create this rapport with the teachers.
Yes.
This comes from our coaches and academic supervisors and from everybody. How do we generate this self-environment so that the teachers will create this self-environment again with our students? And that has been wonderful, especially as we have been basically online for this time. So that is wonderful. And
I'm sorry. That must be very challenging because you're teaching remotely, right? Yes. But at the same time, I just wanted to reinforce this because this goes along with what Kath has mentioned and Mary has mentioned. The English language environment is an environment where us who speak English as a second language, sometimes we feel embarrassed, we feel ashamed, we feel vulnerable, right? Because we want to express themselves, but in a different language. And sometimes we don't feel as confident and are afraid of making mistakes, which is part of the learning process, right? But imagine when you are a teenager and how hard it is for you to put yourself out there and make risks, right? And it's so great to hear how you are building that safe environment at CCCN for both teachers and students, because that all along will bring a collaborative, communicative dynamic into the entire process of the language learning process, learning and teaching process, right? Yes, safe and encouraging environment. Yes, I can see here from the chat. Excellent. Thank you, Lily. Now, I do have one more question for you, which is, so we've talked about how your young learners are learning about social emotional learning skills, and then the teenagers. Now, how about adults, right? Because, and that's one of the things that Kath also mentioned to us, social emotional learning is for everybody, is for every age. And sometimes we tend to think about kids, right? When we're talking about social emotional learning and the phase, that age segment, that it's actually appropriate for learning SEL skills. But we know for ourselves as adults how challenging it is to manage our emotions, relate with others, and cope with our responsibilities. So my question is how CCNN is helping adult learners develop those skills as well in the English classroom.
Well, I think it's the same principle, and adults. I have two wonderful stories, and I wanted to start because you know, when you were talking about mental inequity, and at CCCN we also had and have had, as being a nonprofit, we have a lot of social responsibility programs. And during this period of pandemic, we also worked with different social responsible projects. And we had a particular project of young girls. And we went through the whole process of helping them develop digital skills, and at the same time working with them in getting them to learn the language. So we had a beautiful experience, and this is the importance of teachers connecting to the students, right? But there's a beautiful, beautiful unit about heroes. And one of these areas, they had to talk about their heroes, and these, as I said, this, are low socioeconomic level. And when they had to choose their hero, 95% of that class chose the teacher as their hero.
Wow.
And for us, it was, again, this, I know it's aspirational, but it talks about, moving from self-awareness into self-management as they had reflected on their personal traits and were willing to put in the effort to become the person they would want to be. And these girls also participated, because you were talking about that, how do we develop these strong feelings and idea of self? And what was wonderful is that we had a presentation from National Geographic Explorer. And what amazed us, these girls had just started, they had been with us for a term, but they were willing to put themselves out there and ask questions. And another experience, we have it with the adult program, and we're using Keynote, and our teachers, one of the things for us is getting our teachers also excited about what they are, doing in their classes and the content of their materials. And with the adults, especially, in these areas, some of them might be a little bit resistant, but what we have seen is that the authenticity of the materials, and I have an example, where they have in the area of Keynote, they have to develop life skills like asking and providing clarification, to develop active listening and avoid misunderstanding. And just this part creates awareness, as it supports not only social awareness, but being able to foster more responsible decisions. So teachers, from our point, are encouraged to point out, the role and impact of emotion and beliefs and culture in adults. And one of the things that we see with adults is that they can directly apply it to their communities and their areas of work and bring back that again into the classroom. And not only their areas of work, but also their families. And in spite of biases, they can do it more reflectively in an environment of respect and collaboration. And that is definitely generated through discussions. And we try to have these discussions first in pairs and in group activities. And obviously, we always stress the fact of basically respecting in a classroom and being able to bring that. And it starts again with the environment at the center. It starts again with the environment, with the teachers and the support and the discussion in terms of reflection.
Yes, this is so inspiring. And I just saw a message coming up on the chat box. It's making language learning relevant to everyone, right? Inside and outside the classroom. Yes, this is amazing. And this is so inspiring. Thank you so much, Lily, for sharing the stories with us and all this knowledge, not only stories, but also knowledge that you have been able to, along with your teachers, develop on CCCN. If I were to, sum up all the wonderful things that you've just mentioned to us, I would say, real life topics. It's something that you are using in the classroom to connect directly with the students and make them see themselves, right, into situations. And when they see themselves, they're eager to talk about it, they're eager to interact, and they're eager to participate and share their and express themselves, right? And then you talked about the idea of self, right? How to learn more about yourself. And once you learn about yourself, you build that self-awareness. Is just the next step is just being empathic to others, right? And develop that empathy towards others, because then you can go outside yourself and practice that social awareness as well. And I think the third element that I would like to point out on everything that you shared with us is the creating the safe environment for both teachers and learners. This is something that has absolutely made a difference in your programs. And this is why you have so many inspiring stories to share with us, right?
And Yes, thank you, Fernanda. And if I may say to teachers, and one of the things, because, you know, usually we have the curriculum in place and that things need to be completed and carried out and so forth.
Yes.
But at least we encourage our teachers to have a voice in their classes. We encourage definitely, you know, student and teacher agency, because this is what brings, you know, the whole relevance to the classes. And teachers are encouraged to definitely, they are the ones that know their students. They are the ones that are able to relate to them and to find out what is it that moves and what is it that can get our students emotionally involved within the lessons.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much one more time. And I see from the chat box that everyone has enjoyed the session a lot, because indeed it was a fantastic panel. It was informative, it was insightful, and a great discussion. So Mary, once again, thank you so much for being here. Kath, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us. And Lily, thank you again for sharing so many inspiring stories. We are almost on time here. So unfortunately, we're not going to have time for questions, but I would love to mention that we're keeping track of all the questions that came up, and our plan is to create some blog posts that we're going to be hosting on our webpage related to the session. So stay tuned. One question that came up a lot throughout the session is about the recording and the certificate. So just to point out that you will be receiving a recording of this session along with your certificate of participation within 3 to 5 business days after the session. Before you leave, I just have a few other things to mention. So immediately after the session, you will be directed to a feedback survey. So please let us know what you thought about this session. And also, we would love to hear about future panel topics that you're interested in hearing from us. Be sure to join our online community for teachers of English on our social media channels, where we always offer up-to-date information about events, classroom tips, and program information. We have several more webinars coming up in March, so please stay tuned. And you can sign up through our webinar site right now if you want to. Last but not least, many of the examples that the presenters showed today were from different programs in National Geographic Learning. Look, Our World, Impact, Reach Higher, New Close-Up, Reflect, World English, Keynote, and so many more. So if you're interested in learning more about any National Geographic Learning product in your classroom, please visit our website, eltngl.com. or contact any of our reps in your closest location. Last but not least, because we are right on time and there's a lot of information here. Mary, if you're attending TESOL in Portland this year, Mary and I will be there in March delivering a session around social and emotional learning as well. So we invite you to join us in case you are in that area in March. So last but not least, again, thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Mary, Lily, and Emily. We loved spending this hour with you guys, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.